The fall of the Gaddafi regime is imminent after 42 long years of its dictatorial grip on Libya. The Libyan crisis began in February with the Gaddafi government's use of excessive force against peaceful protests by the Libyan people. Half a year later, the rebel forces have captured most of Tripoli, bringing the fall of the dictatorship in sight. Thousands are estimated to have lost their lives amidst fierce battles between the Libyan military and the rebel forces held in and around Tripoli and Benghazi. As a result, the National Transitional Council, or NTC, a political body formed by anti-Gaddafi forces to represent Libya, came to be recognized as the legitimate governing authority in Libya by numerous nations, including France, Italy, and the United Kingdom. In August, Tunisia announced that it formally recognizes the NTC as the only legitimate representative of the Libyan people. While all eyes are on Libya and its post-Gaddafi movements, the world's great powers are also beginning their contest to secure access to Libya's oil wealth. This week on In Focus, we discuss the past, present, and the future of the Libyan civil war and find out what kind of an impact the crisis will have on Korea.
The Libyan rebel forces took over the capital Tripoli on August 21st, announcing the next day the end of Gaddafi's 4 decades-long iron rule. The Libyan people's calls for democracy resulted in a civil war that lasted for 6 months and have now developed into a power struggle between tribes and a fuel war between world powers. Now, as the situation winds down to a close, what has Libya gained and lost? Today's In Focus will take a look at some of the impacts brought on by the collapse of the Gaddafi regime.
서정민, Professor of Middle East and African Studies, Hankuk University of Foreign Studies Graduate School of International Area Studies. Dennis Florig, Professor, Division of International Studies, Hankuk University of Foreign Studies.
Welcome to all our viewers in Korea and around the world. I am Kim Jae-chun. Finally, the anti-Gaddafi forces took over most of Tripoli and brought an end to the Gaddafi regime. How was this possible and what lies ahead in the future of Libya? To answer these important questions and to talk about much more, we invited two experts to our studio today. Professor Seo, Professor Florig, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Well, Professor Seo, Muammar Gaddafi has been in power in Libya for 42 years, and at one point it seemed as though he's going to remain in power for good. Now his power is going to crumble down to the end. So why is this happening? What has happened in Libya for the past 6 months?
Yes, the beginning of the Libyan civil war resulted from the internal conflicts. So when you compare, the case of Libya with other two countries like Egypt and Tunisia, where we witnessed the success of civil revolution, the Libyan case can be described as an internal conflict led by tribal forces. And the eastern part of the country, basically around the Benghazi area, there's another, tribal forces are very anti-Gaddafi. And they are, wants to, rebuild, the Libyan monarchy system. Sometimes, according to the Western democratic, the values. They are very, at odds with the Gaddafi's, political agenda. That they started to, make a revolt against the Gaddafi regime, and one of the most serious problems, the mistakes, some Gaddafi regime has made. They employed, African mercenaries to quell down the revolt. So it made, almost all, some Libyan people angry about the Gaddafi regime. So it spread to the, some nationwide revolt against the current regime.
People are very curious about the whereabouts of Gaddafi right now. And do you think it's possible for Gaddafi to regroup himself and retake the power in the future? Or is it pretty much done?
No, I don't think so. He left his, the control center, so-called, Babul Azizia, his headquarters of,
How did he escape?
There's a lot of, the bunkers and a lot of, some underground maze. So he used, so whenever he has any, threat from the Western countries, Libya has, some experienced some Western attacks since the 1980s. So he made a lot of, some the escape, some routes, and then some the asylum or safe, some the refugees.
I see. Let's talk about Muammar Gaddafi a little bit. Muammar Gaddafi has been oftentimes portrayed as very unpredictable and unstable dictator by the mainstream media. Oftentimes with Mr. Kim Jong-il, of course. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of person he is and how he came to power in Libya?
It's true that he is an unpredictable force, but he does fit a certain pattern in the Arab world. He's one of the last of the Arab socialist governments that came to power in the 1950s and 1960s on a wave of anti-Western feeling in the Arab world. One of his models was Colonel Nasser, who was also a young military officer who seized power in a coup and who was actually closer to the Soviet Union than he was to the West. Another model for Gaddafi was the Algerian Revolution, which kicked out the French. Now, most of these governments are either gone or have been transformed over the years. Nasser died in the 1970s, and his successors were more pro-Western. The Algerian Revolution has kind of lost its steam, and in fact the revolutionaries in Algeria more recently in the 1990s were Muslims, and the Algerians turned to the West to get aid in fighting a Muslim insurrection. Saddam Hussein is another in that group of Arab socialist dictators, and of course we know what happened to him.
So he's going to go down into history as one of the worst dictators, I guess.
Well, yes, he was a brutal dictator.
Okay. Professor, it is obvious that the current situation in Libya was affected by the situations in Tunisia and Egypt. So can you tell us a little bit about what happened in Tunisia and Egypt and how those situations acted as a catalyst in Libya?
Yes. So if you look at the, some cases of Tunisia and Egypt, so the most important, some background of the, some civil revolution can be said as the socio-economic. So, the unemployment rate was so high, and then there's a lot of, some economic difficulties, and people were very angry about the government economic policies and social policies. But in the case of Libya, so Libya has a lot of, some the oil reservoir, and then there, some GDP per capita is over, some $6,000. Is not that low, and then, some the Libya. If you look at the case of Libya, I may say, some the main, the background of the, some the civil war is, some political or, tribal or environmental. So, some a lot of, some the Libyan people were encouraged by the, some the new, some Arab Spring, some democratic movement in the, neighboring countries. So this is one of the most important, some difference between the cases between Libya and other, some countries in the Arab world.
Okay, maybe we can talk a little bit more about those differences. In the meantime, it seems to me that these democratic movements are spreading like a bushfire in the region. And now Syria is not safe. Yemen's dictatorship is in danger. Even Saudi Arabia is not immune from these democratic movements. So what are the common factors that have been driving these democratic movements in the region?
Well, as Professor Saw said, some of these countries have a lot of poor people. For example, in Egypt, the vast majority of the population is poor. Some of the other governments have relatively large oil revenues, especially compared to their population. So it isn't always poverty. But it is often youth unemployment. Even in the more well-off countries, well-educated youth often have a hard time finding jobs that are commensurate with their education and their skills. And of course, many of these dictatorships have very brutally suppressed their people. And so rebellion is a result of that. And particularly, the point about the revolution spreading is a very important point, because hope is one of the important things. You have repression all around the world. You have poverty in many parts of the world. But it's when people have hope that things can change that they tend to rise up. So when the Tunisian success of the Tunisian uprising led to the Egyptian uprising, and Egypt, of course, is the most important state in the Arab world. It has roughly 1 out of every 4 Arabs on the planet. So when Egypt underwent its transformation, it set off a brush fire around the rest of the Arab world.
Including Professor and Professor Forik, experts are saying that all these countries have different situations and different reasons for democratization movements. So what are the things that separate Libya from other countries in the region?
I think the most important thing that separates Libya is the Western intervention. The United States and the Western powers have been trying to get rid of Gaddafi almost since he first came to power. In the 1980s, Reagan bombed several of his compounds and tried to assassinate him. So Gaddafi has been a target for a long, long time. And I think that it's really Western intervention that tipped the scales in favor of the rebels. Most of the other uprisings in the Arab Spring have not been successful either in bringing down the government, or in the case of Yemen or Bahrain or Morocco or Algeria or Jordan, or if they've been successful in bringing down the government, like in Egypt, they haven't really been successful in transforming the political system yet. So I think that the decisive factor in Libya was the NATO bombing campaign and the covert support that was given to the rebels.
So Libya has one of the largest oil reserves in the world, so maybe for that reason, Libya has attracted huge attention.
And then when you talk about some of the differences between the Libya and other some Arab countries, the nature of political change is so different. So if you look at the cases of Tunisia and Egypt, this is the civil revolution. And this is some protest movement against the authoritarian regime. But the case of Libya is internal conflict. It's a civil war. There's two parties fighting each other to some control over the power in the country. It's a totally different kinds of the political upheaval. So we should focus then the outcomes of the success of the revolution may be different.
I see. Professor, so anyways, now that Muammar Gaddafi is gone, all eyes are on Yemen and Syria. How do you foresee the futures of, how do you evaluate the fates of these dictators in these countries?
Yes, there's one question, why Egypt and Tunisia has succeeded in a relatively rapid and quick revolution, and other three countries, Syria, Yemen, Libya, it has taken so long time. So there's a difference. As I mentioned, some Libya and Syria and Yemen, there's a tribal conflicts. If you look at the traditions of tribes in the Arab world, they have two very important value of the controlling their mind. The first one is winner takes everything. It means what? The Gaddafi regime and Syrian regime and Yemeni regime should fight to the end. If they lost the battle, they lose everything. And second one is some tradition of revenge. So, if there's some kind of fighting, fighting is getting worse and worse because of this, some revenge, the tradition. That's why the three countries, Libya, Syria, Yemen, has a lot of, bloodshed, and compared to those of Tunisia and Egypt. So I do believe, this is a tribal conflict, and that it takes time. And then if the revolution, even though revolution, may be succeeded, successful, there should be a lot of some problem in the future.
Well, what are your thoughts on this, Professor Forik? Do you think the days of these dictators are numbered, or do you think they will remain in power for a significant time?
It's hard to say. I mean, the Syrian government is the last of these Arab socialist regimes that I was talking about now that Gaddafi's gone. And so they are a target of the West in a way that the other regimes are not. But Professor Saw is right. There are deep ethnic divisions within Syria. The Assad regime, the father and the son, they are Alawite Muslims, which is a minority sect. And so the majority of people in Syria do not belong to that sect and do not belong to that group. So that gives a lever for the rebels that may not be available in some other parts of the world. The case of Yemen is different. Yemen was once three different countries. There was once a North Yemen, a South Yemen, and an Aden, which is a port city. And some of those old divisions still remain, as well as the tribal divisions. But the West has been very ambivalent about the regime there, because on the one hand they can see that it's weak, but on the other hand, Al-Qaeda in Yemen is now considered the #1 terrorist threat by the CIA, and they don't want anything that would lead Yemen to become a failed state, and given the internal divisions within Yemen, that's a very definite possibility. So I would expect that the West will try to hold the line in Yemen, at least until they can see some way out of the crisis.
Professor Florig, let me ask you a little bit tough question here. Do you think this democratic movement will spread toward the Central Asia and ultimately to China and to North Korea?
Spreading to North Korea and China, I think, is unlikely.
Central Asia.
They're also mostly Muslims in Central Asia, but they're not Arabs. They don't speak Arabic. I don't think there's as close identification to the Arab world. I mean, in the Arab world, there are 23 states, but in fact, all Arabs think of themselves as Arabs. If Arabia was one country, it would be a country of 350 million people. It would be the third largest, more populous than the United States, the third largest population country in the world. So I think the probability is that this will spread through the Arab world, but not necessarily beyond.
What is your take on this?
I do have somewhat different opinions. So I want to define the current, the political upheaval in the Arab world as a new type of revolution in the 21st century. It's not only, it's not only restricted to the area of Arab countries. This is the revolution, new type of revolution against the authoritarian regime, the male-dominated authoritarianism mindset. So it means what? So the revolution has been supported by SNS. It's very fast, the spreading, the revolutionary tide. So it may have a very, some serious, some impact and consequences on even on China and North Korea. This is the last authoritarian regime in the world. So the current revolution may have changed the people's mind to give them some confidence to the fight against the authoritarian regime with the new tools of new media, SNS.
I think in the case of China, it's very unlikely. The Chinese regime is basically popular among the people. It has made many people much better off than they were before. So there's a lot of protest and there's a lot of unhappiness with the bureaucracy and with particular policies of the government. But I think that government has a great deal of legitimacy. I don't see, in the periphery, in the Muslim Uyghur region and in Tibet, there may be rebellions, but within the mainland of China, I see that regime as very stable and very legitimate, even though it has, serious problems. And North Korea, if a change comes in North Korea, it's certainly possible. People have been predicting it for the last quarter of a century, and it hasn't happened yet. But if it happens, I think it would be because of what's happening in North Korea. I really don't think the Arab Spring will be a decisive factor.
Okay. Let's talk about the economic implications of Gaddafi's demise here. Libya has one of the largest oil reserves in the world, and a lot of people in the world, the entire world, as a matter of fact, is watching, and they're curious about which country is going to get how much. So what is your...
Well, Libya is an oil-rich country, but it's only about 2% of global production. So if Libyan oil gets back on the market full scale, it could have some effect on weakening the price of oil. But Libya is not a huge oil exporting country like Saudi Arabia or Iraq or Iran.
Well, which country is going to come out as the winner in this oil game here?
Yeah, I do think France is the winner of this game, because Libya is not some large oil exporter as Professor Flores mentioned, but a lot of European countries are dependent on Libyan oil. So Libyan oil is somewhat some different kind of the Saudi Arabian oil. So that's why, some of the European, some of the refinery facilities are fit to the, the Libyan oil to, the provide, some of the consumers in that continent. So it's very important, for the, some European countries. And that's why France, Italy, and, the United Kingdom has a very positive has taken very positive actions against Gaddafi, and they made a very quick and rapid interventions in the case of Libya. So anyway, they made some great effort to to change the regime in Libya. So that's why I do believe the France and Italy has made a lot of some the advantages in the future reconstruction some the boom in Libya.
How is the situation in Libya affecting Korea? Is it having a positive impact on the Korean economy?
Surely. Libya is very important, some the partner with Korea in terms of, some economy and in terms of the construction, some the business. So we have, some contracted with Libya almost, some the more than, some 30 or $40 billion during the last 30 years. And then, some our, some the big, business circle are expecting to have more, some, some the several, some the dozens of $1 billion in the future to contract in Libya. And then Libya is not, some main, some the oil supporter to Korea, but, some the Libya has the very important, geopolitical, some the position in North Africa. So if you have, some, if the Libya is stabilized, we have, much more, some the opportunities in working in Libya. And then as for Europe, and even for us, we do have, some very serious, some the economic crisis, maybe double deep, some the economic crisis. And then Libya's reconstruction projects may give us some opportunities to cope with the current, some economic problems in the world.
Yes, but the scale is relatively small compared to the problems of the European and North American economy. So it'll be a shot in the arm, but I don't think it'll have a huge impact. I think you're absolutely right that because France and Italy and the UK were out in front in supporting the Libyan rebels, that they are more likely to be rewarded. I think South Koreans may be a little bit overly enthusiastic about how many contracts they're actually going to be able to win from this new government.
Okay, how do you foresee the future of Libya? What lies ahead in the future of Libya from now on?
So as I mentioned before, some the nature of the Libyan political upheaval is somewhat different with those of Tunisia and Egypt. So this is a tribal conflict, and this is the civil war, and then the stabilization process will take time. Because there's three main some the obstacles. First one is how to make some the compromised some government. So now we are some looking at the the role and activities of National Transitional Council. And then inside that council, there's a lot of, some of the political forces. There's Islamic, there's a secularist, there's the nationalist, there's the tribal leaders. And then it's very important to find some kind of consensus in that, some organization. Second one is, as I mentioned, as I emphasized many times about how to overcome the tribalism in Libya. The final one is, the upsurge of Islamist movements. So, some in eastern part of Libya, there's an Islamic fighting group and other, radical Islamist group wants to take the opportunity of this current, instability to, to spread their, some the influence in Egypt, the Libyan political arena. So these three main, some obstacles should be, some dealt with at the same time, but it's not easy task.
What is the role of the international community in order for Libyans to have a smooth and speedy transition?
Well, the UN has just released some of the frozen funds. Gaddafi's assets were frozen at the beginning of the rebellion. And just recently, the UN has released $1.5 billion of those funds. So Westerners will be very important in financing the new government and giving technical support to the new government. But I think the the structure of the government or the nature of the government will be determined primarily by Libyans. And Professor Suh is right. It's a very fractured society, and I think there probably will be some fairly intense jockeying for power will go on before we really know the nature of the new government. Under Gaddafi, any kind of ordinary civil society or any ordinary political activity was completely frozen. So we really don't know the balance of forces within Libya once the lid of repression is lifted. But we can pretty much predict that because it's a fractionalized society, that there will be pretty intense competition for power.
Anyways, the dictatorship has come to an end in Libya, but the country is still faced with the very difficult task of democratic transition. I think we shouldn't be forgetting that the international community should provide help for them to have a smooth and speedy transition.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this is all for today's discussion. Thank you very much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you very much.